Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. And this webinar is on two things today. It is on the issue of broad-based Black economic empowerment here in South Africa on the one hand, and on the other hand, how to be strategic within your businesses, not necessarily overreaching, and understanding how you can still get to a level 2 by being a level 4. And I know that sounds strange, but we'll talk about that in the second part of today's discussion. I hope you will be freed up at the end of today's discussion to understand a couple of key issues. Number one, BEE is not a trap. BEE is not something you have to be afraid of. And importantly, Triple BE is not a situation where you're being asked to give away your company, give up your company, sacrifice what you've spent years, if not decades, building. And equally importantly, BEE is also not asking every single company in South Africa to be verified as a level 1 business to remain in business and to be competitive. These are the things that I'm going to want to be doing today. I want to go over the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Scorecard, very quickly telling you from how it differs from the original scorecard. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you should all be verified under the new scorecard. Those of you who are telling me you're not at the moment non-compliant, I assume that some of you are saying that you were compliant, and then as soon as the scorecard changed, you became non-compliant. I want to talk about something that many companies seem to be ignoring, and that is, or rather many companies seem to be believing, and that is that they don't need necessarily to chase broad-based Black economic verification, and that they can stay out of this thing I call the affected loop because they don't need triple BE. I'm going to talk about that in a little while. We'll talk about the different size businesses. I'm going to talk about minimum requirements, and then we're going to talk about the 5 elements. And those 5 elements are ownership, their management control, their skills development, their procurement, and their social economic development. And then obviously under the MAC Charter, there's a 6th element, which is responsible marketing. I'm going to talk about fronting because fronting is becoming more and more important in terms of a consideration. There is now a triple BE commission. There's a commissioner, and they are chasing the companies which ostensibly are fronting, although we still do not have a law in the country which is anti-fronting. Something that I think is critically important is we talk about demographics. You are going to have to understand demographics and how they apply to your business if you operate in more than one region in the country, and if it cannot be said that you're a truly national kind of an organization. Please feel free, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions, to challenge any points. I had a discussion on air this morning with a seasoned entrepreneur here in South Africa who, quite frankly, was extremely slating of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And what it became very obvious to me that he was in fact critical of was not triple BEE, but in fact corruption. And corruption and triple BEE are not the same thing. The idea that there are corrupt triple BEE beneficiaries out there are companies that are using triple BEE for their own nefarious purposes without doing the right things. That's got nothing to do with the veracity and the ability of triple BE to serve everybody's needs. It's got to do with the fact that there are corrupt criminals out there. And that's a completely different issue. This is the first thing I wanted to point out to you. And I don't know why there seems to be such a misunderstanding of what is going on here. If you look at this slide that is in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, this is what South Africa's population makeup looks like. And importantly, what is in black, what is in the black rectangle is the groupings in South Africa that are beneficiaries of broad-based Black economic empowerment. What is in red, i.e. white males and white females, are not beneficiaries of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And it's that simple, that what is in black, all the way from Indian females, all the way down to black males, these are the individuals who are beneficiaries. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories of our population are beneficiaries of triple BEE, and white males and white females are not beneficiaries of triple BEE. There was a call from the African National Congress in 2016 for the next round of triple BEE negotiations, which are anticipated to be concluded by about 2023, that in that round, the scorecard, the triple BEE measurement scorecard that evolves from that from that round of engagement and negotiation, that at that stage, Indian females, Indian males, and colored males should be excluded as beneficiaries from broad-based black economic empowerment, because the argument goes, the real problem, which is around black males and even black females, proportionately in the country, those numbers are not moving. Yes, there are a huge number of black females and black males who are moving because of triple BEE up the rungs into directorship and certainly also into ownership. But if you look at the massive number of our population, the massive percentage of our population, which is 75% who are black females and black males, there's virtually no demographic movement. And so the argument is that what began in 2010 as 2013 as a sunset clause, which basically excluded white males and white females, that's when the sunset clause was first applied, that sunset clause in 2023 should be moving its way down this spectrum all the way to colored females, black females, and black males. And that from 2023 onwards, the argument goes that if you were going exclusively by who triple BE has benefited over the last 10 years, it very definitely would be Indian females, Indian males, and colored males, to the extent that they should be excluded as beneficiaries from triple BE advantages, so that the real challenges, which is colored females, and black males, can be dealt with over the following 10 years, between 2023 to 2033. Every 10 years or so, the scenario, the framework of broad-based black economic empowerment is renegotiated. The scorecards are changed. The notion that the goalposts keep moving in triple BE is an absolute misnomer. It's an absolute misdirection. The triple BE scorecards and the goalposts do not keep moving. They get clarified, yes. They get refined, yes. Sometimes elements in the triple BE scorecard get changed because of abuse a lot of the time. But the idea that the goalposts keep moving is just not true. What was envisaged in 2000 as broad-based black economic empowerment is very similar to how now broad-based black economic empowerment looks. The scorecard has evolved, and for some of its elements, the scorecard has changed, but certainly not to the extent that you can say triple BEE is wishy-washy, is non-specific, and doesn't apply to the workplace. So I think that that's critically important. So as you can see, race and gender very much defines how triple BEE works in the country, and what is regarded as black, in other words, Indian, colored, and black, and Chinese people naturalized before 1994, that has remained very, very constant since 2003. And like I say, certainly since 2013, let me say, and is highly unlikely to change until 2023, and maybe even not after 2023. And the reason I say that is there is an argument that there should be a sunset clause against Indian males and Indian females and colored males, because they have benefited disproportionately over the last 10 years to how black females or black males or even colored females have benefited from the application of broad-based black economic empowerment. So if you look at the numbers, if you look at the facts and statistics, you would argue that it is time for a sunset clause against Indian females, Indian males, and colored males, so that we can get to the real challenge of broad-based black economic empowerment, which is how do we benefit black females, black males, and colored females. But the reality is that the influence of the Indian community in particular on policy in this country, there is an absolute stranglehold influence, and you just need to look at the Department of Trade and Industry and many other government departments to see how influential the Indian male and Indian female and colored male is in those hallways to understand why it is unlikely that what was called for by the KZN ANC in 2016 is actually going to happen. Politics is going to get in the way of the regular application of the sunset clause so that broad-based black economic empowerment can get to the real nub of where the problem is, i.e. the 75% of ethnic black people in our population and colored females in our population who are still massively underrepresented in terms of benefit. Let me just say this. I talk about 2013 and I talk about 2023, but the first scorecard was promulgated in 2003. And as I like saying, in 2003, a white female was actually black. A white female found herself within this rectangle. And by 2013, it was discovered that the majority of companies had in fact only benefited white females through their BBBEE strategy, and maybe some Indian males and some Indian females, but certainly nothing in the colored community and nothing in the ethnic black community. And so that's why in 2013, where it was determined that there'd been sufficient movement amongst white females so that they were no longer dispossessed and that they were no longer not directors, and they were no longer financially benefiting in the workplace and as shareholders, they were taken out of the mix of broad-based black economic empowerment beneficiaries. Very interesting racial dynamic at that stage. So every 10 years, the thing changes. The original scorecard had just too many measurement categories. They had 7 measurement categories, got very, very confusing. And so by the time those measurement categories were changed, they were changed dramatically so that the new scorecard by 2016, the new scorecard was looking completely different. But in fact, just incorporating those original 7 areas of focus. The original 7 areas of focus were ownership, management and control, employment equity, skills development, preferential procurement, enterprise supplier development, and socio-economic development. By the time that scorecard changed 10 years later, it was one which said ownership was the first element. The second element was a combination of management control and employment equity. The third element remained skills development. And then the fourth element was a combination of preferential procurement on the one hand, including enterprise and supplier development on the other hand. And then the fifth element was socioeconomic development. So when a company tells you that it went from being rated under the original scorecard to in fact not being rated and not verified under the new scorecard, one has to ask the question, where did you go wrong? Because the reality is nothing really changed. And a good verification consultant acting with a good verification agency would have realized that everything you'd done under those 7 elements could be accounted for and therefore could be earning BBBEE recognition under the new 5-element scorecard, which is the subject of today's discussion. This is critically important because it is in this table that's in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, that you begin to get an idea of why you are valuable to your customer base and why your suppliers are valuable to you. And this is that loop, that interdependent loop that I keep talking about. If you look here, a non-compliant company at the bottom of this particular table, a non-compliant company is a company which has earned less than 30 out of 109 points, 30 out of a possible 109 points. Now, they've got 30 points because, well, it can be said that they are, let's say, white, male-owned. The vast majority of their managers are white and male. They don't spend any money on skills development of the right kind, and we'll talk about that in a little while. They continue to procure from white-owned businesses. And from a social economic development point of view, they only really give money to charities which traditionally are not transformed charities. So you have to be a particularly blinkered kind of a company to not measure up on any of those previous elements of the scorecard. or you have to have a human resource manager or officer or consultant who is deaf, dumb, and blind, quite frankly, to the opportunities of broad-based Black economic empowerment. It is very difficult not to earn points. If your business is operating in this day and age, and you're not operating in Orania, it is extremely difficult for us not to find enough points to at least get you on the rung, which would be level 8, where you're earning between 30 and 40 points. All right. By the way, the technology, the architecture of the scorecard is such that for you to get to a level 8, you invariably are going to be rated as a level 7, and then you're going to have to drop a level because you're being penalized for not doing the right thing. But why this is important is for us to look at level 4. If you look at level 4, you will start to see the magic of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And what was built here was a system of incentives to companies to want to change. If you look on the right-hand column, you'll see where it says BBBEE recognition level. If you're a level 4, it means that for every R1 your customer is spending with you, you are giving them a rand's worth of recognition. You're giving them 100% recognition because of your BBBEE level, so that for every rand they are spending with you, they're getting a rand of recognition in terms of preferential procurement spend, which is critically important. Because in their own right, if you are the wrong kind of level, so if you're a level 6 or 7 or 8 or non-compliant, you're actually losing them points from level 5 onwards. So as you can see, a level 5 rated business says to its clients, for every rand you spend with me, I'm only giving you 80 cents preferential procurement recognition. I'm only giving you 80 cents preferential procurement recognition. And I just want to go back here. That preferential procurement recognition over here, as you can see, is 45 points out of 119 points. So if your suppliers are not at the right level, which is level 4, 3, 2, or 1, they're actually losing you points here under element 4, which is enterprise supplier development and procurement. They're losing you points there. So it is very, very important that you understand this affected loop and how it works and how it affects everybody. Let's say, and I use this all the time, so if you've heard me say it before, I do apologize. But let's say my wife makes me buy the toilet paper for my business from her mother. And her mother is a white, she might be female, but she's a white-owned business. And so as a result, I am buying from a non-compliant business. So for every rand I spend on toilet paper with my mother-in-law, I am getting 0 BBBEE preferential procurement recognition. That's not bad. It's not a bad strategy if the only person I'm trying to make happy is my wife and her mother, because I can quite easily then choose that the rest of the companies I buy product from or service from are companies which are level 3, level 2, or level 1, because as you can see from those companies, I'm actually earning more than 100% preferential procurement points. So as long as there are enough level 3, 2, or 1 companies in the mix, I'm going to be able to counter the fact that I have to keep buying toilet paper from my mother-in-law and earning 0 preferential procurement points. I know this sounds complicated. It is actually dead simple once you start working with it. Your average white-owned business should be targeting to be a level 5 or a level 4, never a level 6, 7, or 8. And if you're a level 5 or 4, I can show you how within a matter of months you can jump 2 levels immediately. So if you're a 5, you can get to a 3 within 3 months. If you're a 4, you can get to a 2 within 3 or 4 months because of the Youth Employment Service massive benefit, which is now available to you and really is not a major difficult or expensive thing to do. So Ariella says, so your mom-in-law could be compliant if she signs an affidavit. If she's doing more than 10 million rands worth of business and she refuses to change and she refuses to adapt, she's never going to be anything close to a level 4. If she's doing less than 10 million rand business, in other words, she sells less than 10 million rand toilet paper, then certainly she would qualify from being a level 4. As far as an affected loop is concerned, what you do need to understand, there is too much apathy out there, and people are not understanding, even in this day and age, people are not understanding that your score counts towards your customer's score, and your customer's score counts towards their customer's score. So it becomes an affected loop. Your suppliers affect your score, you affect your customer's score. And this affected loop means that, and this has got nothing to do with public-private business in South Africa. So it actually has got nothing to do with the fact that government, if you're not a business that does business with government, that you can ignore BBBEE. Because if you are a company that supplies a private sector company that is dependent on government contracts, then that private sector company is going to insist on your BBBEE level actually being the right kind of level. And importantly, if you are a third degree removed business, so your customer is a private sector customer that in any way is dependent on business from another private sector business that is dependent on business from the public sector, then that third degree of impact will affect your business levels and your turnover. We are already at the stage where, for example, if you're in the media, advertising, communication sector and you are anything higher than a level 3, you might as well close your doors today, because in the media, advertising, and communication sector, as an example, the majority of level 1 and 2 black-owned businesses are so competitive that if you are a white-owned business anywhere higher than the level 3 business, you are simply not going to get work. The effect of transformation in that sector, particularly in the agency game, but also in the creative space, has worked to such a huge extent that it has virtually ruled out any level 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 from in any way whatsoever, in any way whatsoever being competitive. And I think that you need to understand that to be able then to understand that there is absolutely no way that you can compete in that sector if you're not at a level 3. Which means if you're a level 5 and you can use yes to jump to a level 3, that's fantastic. If you're a level 4 and you can use yes to jump to a level 2, it means then that when a company is putting out a tender, and that tender then is placed to benefit level 2 businesses, you will still be on a pecking order of what kind of a level 2 business you are. In other words, are you a black-owned level 2, a 51% black-owned level 2 business, or in fact, are you a level 2 for another reason? But at least you will be in the shortlist to be considered. Whereas if you're a level 4 or 5, you're not going to get anywhere close to that shortlist to be considered. I don't want to, well, I need to overemphasize the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that if you ignore BBBEE, or if you think you can depend on your level 4 status, you're dead in the water. You're dead in the water. And I'm going to use the construction sector as an example here by showing you that in the construction sector, when the Charter Council for Construction was created, so that the generic scorecard no longer applied, but in fact now a construction scorecard applied, a white-owned business that would ordinarily be regarded, as a level 4 business under the generic scorecard, in the construction charter scorecard, that business would be regarded as a level 5. So already you're seeing industry by industry by industry beginning to discount white-owned businesses, and you've seen that happen now in the construction sector, and you're seeing more and more that is going to happen in many of the other sectors. None of the other sectors have yet taken that gap or that opportunity, but it's a matter of time, in fact, before that happens. Any questions or comments? I'd like to hear. Unmute your microphone if anyone wants to make a point. I'd just like to hear from you, ladies and gentlemen, to make sure I'm not talking into the ether. All right, let me carry on then until I do hear from you. Broad-based Black economic empowerment is not a compliance issue. It's a competitiveness issue, and it's essential to remaining in business. I spoke to someone this morning who said BBBEE is corruption. BBBEE is a scam. But you can understand the objectives of BBBEE. And if you do understand the objectives of BBBEE, you understand that what it is about is it's about allowing people who ordinarily have been out of the supply chain in the business sector to come into and to remain in the supply chain through an artificial mechanism, yes, but at least for them to be able to get their foot in the door. What we've seen now in the creative sector of media, advertising, and communication, which is very encouraging, is that foot in the door has been there for long enough now for people to be able to compete, not on the basis of color or race or gender, but on the basis of the quality of their work. There are enough level 2 and level 1 Black-owned businesses to compete with one another and not to have to be competing with white-owned businesses in that sector. And white-owned businesses are having to compete on the basis of quality with Black-owned businesses who have both race and gender as well as quality now to their advantage. And if you just look at the level of innovation in that sector, there can be no doubt that a Black-owned business, a Black-owned female business, a Black-owned female disabled business is also a very, very quality conscious business in that sector and will not put out second or third class work. It's just not going to happen. So you've seen massive transformation. In fact, I think that out of all of the sectors in this country, you've seen more transformation in the media, advertising, communication space than in fact, because maybe it's a lower level of entry kind of an industry than other industries, than in fact you've seen in almost any other industry in the country, except for maybe in IT, and that's because anyone in a nappy with a laptop can get into an IT company. But outside of that, those two industries, you've seen very little transformation taking place in other industries. So here are the rules. In the public sector, anyone who supplies government or any SOE, such as Eskom, Transnet, Portnet, etc., or is in a direct line of a relationship to any of their suppliers, those are the companies that have no choice but to transform and get a BBBEE rating of at least level 4 or higher. Any recipient of funding from government, anyone who wants to benefit from a public-private partnership, anyone who wants to purchase any state-owned asset or a part of a state-owned asset, or any business recipient of government grants needs to have a BBBEE rating. And we don't need to go any further than the last 2 months, literally the last 2 months, where both the small business department under the small business minister and the tourism department made the receiving of COVID-19 grants so that your businesses can remain viable during the period of lockdown, made those criteria absolutely dependent on BBBEE level 4. And in that regard, very few white-owned BBBEE level 4 companies got those grants from the SMME department, from the tourism department. So, for example, in the tourism sector, 50,000 Rand was given out to companies which were at least level 4, 3, 2, or 1. But what they found is there were enough level 1, level 2, level 3, and Black-owned level 4 businesses to completely exclude the white-owned level 4 businesses as recipients of benefits. There were a couple who did receive, but certainly to no medium extent whatsoever. So a business recipient of government grants, we've now seen the impact that in 2000, that particular criteria was put into BBBEE regulations. No one really understood it until they heard that the government was giving grants to small businesses and the government was giving grants to small businesses in the tourism industry. But if you were not triple BEE compliant, at least at a level 4, you were not going to get those grants. Now suddenly everybody understands that element of triple BEE and why it was put into triple BEE regulations and legislation in 2000. Any regulated industry or concession holder, company seeking a license or a concession from government. Now this is quite important. Government have generally not applied triple BEE requirements for licensing purposes. They've applied triple BEE requirements where there are grants and there are tenders that have been made available where they say only if you're a license holder with a triple BEE verification of level 43201 will you qualify for these tenders, for these grants, etc., etc. We are now at the stage where the Black Leadership Forum and the Black Management Forum has forced government through NEDLAC with National Economic Development Labour Council, which is essentially a tool of the ANC SACP COSATU alliance, but where they've actually forced NEDLAC to concede that in the next round of triple BEE negotiations, so that by 2023 any new scorecard will be reflective of those negotiations, the very granting of business licenses in particular industries and sectors, which are government and parastatal and SOE linked industries and sectors, will very much become dependent on triple BEE levels. Now you need to work that out for yourself within the context of what your company does in the industry and the sector you operate in. But you might very well in that regard be staring down the barrel of a scenario where unless you're a level 43201, triple BEE 43201 company, you're actually not going to get a license to practice. We're even seeing talk of that in the legal fraternity, which is absolutely unheard of. But the Black Lawyers Association are putting pressure. I don't think that it's going to be anytime soon that they succeed, but putting pressure on who gets admitted certainly to the bar, but even potentially who gets admitted as candidate attorneys. And then obviously a company on the national triple BEE database, a company needing a triple BEE label for consumer products, services, or retailers, a company trading on its credibility and compliance credentials with its client base. Those are the companies affected by broad-based Black economic empowerment. By now, you know which category you fall into. You're either an exempted micro enterprise, which means you're doing less than 10 million Rand a year, and that's where can't remember who it was. I think it was Ariella. That's where Ariella was quite correct. If you're an exempt micro enterprise, you will automatically be a level 4 as long as you sign an affidavit. But what's also happening now is that the Commission are starting to inspect those level 4 affidavits for veracity. Because in fact what they're finding is that companies are doing a lot more than 10 million Rand of turnover, but they're in fact reducing their turnover artificially to qualify for those EME certificates. Qualifying small enterprises doing between 10 and 50 million Rand a year, and then large businesses doing more than 50 million Rand a year. So there are 3 categories of businesses, and really the only free ride you get is in the EME category. But like I say, it's very, very difficult for you as an EME to compete, particularly now, 20 years into this game, when there are more than enough Black-owned or partially Black-owned businesses to be level 1, 2, and even 3, really to shoot you out of the market and out of the water as a level 4 exempt micro enterprise. So exempt micro enterprises, if white owned, are level 4. If they're 51% black owned, in other words, you do less than 10 million, but you're 51% black owned, you're level 2. And if you're 100% black owned and you do less than 10 million, you're a level 1. So that's how the exempt micro enterprises look. So as you can see, the 10 million Rand is an artificial indication of who you're competing with. Because if you're competing with a 10 million Rand or less kind of business, but they happen to be 51% black owned or higher, then it's a level 4 competing with a level 2. And the only way you can get from a level 4 to a level 2, quite frankly, certainly in a short period of time, is by utilizing the youth employment service opportunities rather than necessarily starting to gear your business against the 5 elements you would ordinarily be measured against. So the next category after EME is qualifying small businesses. And if white owned, you need to comply and be measured against all 5 elements. And I'm going to talk about them in a little while. If you're 51% black owned, you'll automatically receive a level 2 rating, which means that you don't get measured against the 5 elements if you're black owned, even if you do more than 10 million rand turnover. But if you want to get from a level 2 to a level 1, that's when you start measuring yourself against those 5 elements. And if you're 100% black owned, you go straight to level 1, irrespective of whether you're doing 10 million, 20, 30, 40, or 45 million rand turnover a year. Now, the one thing you do need to know is that there are penalties that are built into the system. If a large business doesn't, so there are 5 elements, and we're going to talk about those elements in a little while. But if a large business fails to meet 3 of those 5 elements in terms of the minimum requirements, which is 40% achieved in those 5 elements, then in fact what will happen is that any failure, whether you're failing on ownership, whether you're failing on skills development, or whether you're failing on procurement, any failure in any one of those 3 elements, ownership, skills development, or procurement, will mean that you drop a BBBEE level. If you're going to fail on one, and I've seen many companies say this, if we're going to fail on one, we might as well fail on all 3 because we're going to drop a level. Yes, you're going to drop only 1 level, but you're going to lose additional points in terms of how you're going to be measured. So don't aim to fail on all 3 just because you have to fail on 1. That's the craziest thing, and yet it happens so often that I see that applied. Totally unnecessary, but unfortunately very pervasive. If a qualifying small enterprise is going to fail, it has a choice. It really only has to be measured against 2 elements and not 3 elements. Ownership is a non-negotiable. So if you drop 40% below ownership, you immediately lose a BBBEE level. But then there's a choice. You can choose between skills development or procurement. If you pass skills development but fail on procurement, you won't lose a level. If you pass procurement but fail on skills development, you won't lose a level. You will, in other words, when I say pass or fail there, but you are all right on ownership, you're more than 40% on ownership. So the point about understanding these penalties is that a large company has 3 non-negotiable 40% levels, whereas a small company, a medium-sized business doing more than 10 million but less than 50 million turnover, can choose between skills development or procurement to be measured against, but cannot sacrifice ownership. It's here that I start hearing those accusations. I need to give my company away because ownership is a non-negotiable. You don't need to give anything away, by the way, and we're going to talk about ownership in a little while, but you do not need to give anything away. Nothing for nothing, nothing for free in terms of broad-based black economic empowerment. It's an absolute misnomer. It's because accountants and bookkeepers don't understand how it works that they'll lie to their clients and customers. But the reality is there's nothing built into broad-based black economic empowerment that says you're having to give anything away for nothing. These are your 5 generic elements that you are going to be measured against on a generic scorecard. It changes in any industry that has a charter council that has been allowed to be created. So, for example, I've already mentioned construction. I've already mentioned media, advertising, communication. And there are many charter councils that have been created with their own scorecards that add elements. So, for example, in MAC, there's a 6th element that's been added here, which is responsible marketing, and change elements. The example I gave you in the construction sector in terms of definition of who an EME is it a 4, is it a 5, etc., etc. So the closer an industry or a sector gets to BBBEE, the more it's going to want to control its own destiny and be measured generically in this country. I always say to industries, you should try and form a charter council before your other social partners, before the trade unions or before government, try to force a charter council down your throat. Because if you go to government and say, we want our own charter council, government is only too eager to listen and help facilitate that you end up with your own charter council. Whereas if you are facing a charter council which is being forced on you, it's normally because a couple of your competitors have got together with some trade unions and have got together with government and are basically then forcing a scenario for the entire sector based on their trading realities. So you need to be aware of that, ladies and gentlemen. This is a game of politics, and how these scorecards get changed and how these charter councils get created. It's all a game of politics. Okay, so let's talk about ownership now. I'm going to say this to you, that unless you're going to sell your business, 100% of your business, 100% of the shares in your business, then you never sell 51% of your business. It doesn't make sense to enter into a triple BEE deal as the reason for selling 51% shares in your business, because as I always say, you've simply ended up discounting the value of your business by 49%. Because the moment there's a new owner of 51% shares in your business, they have controlling interest in your business. There are ways around it, and those are for other discussions and conversations, and I'm generalizing. But understand what I'm saying. Do not look for triple BEE reasons to want to sell 51% share in your business, because you've basically given your business away, you've discounted the value by 49%, you've lost control of your business. The reality is you do not need to play with anything more than 26% of a share transfer in your business into the hands of black beneficiaries. And I need to define what I mean by black beneficiaries, ladies and gentlemen. But you do not need to get rid of more than 26% of the share of your business. And anything more than 26%, in my opinion, is foolhardy. It's lazy. It's you saying, well, for the purpose of only triple BEE, I'm prepared to destroy my shareholding in this business. Who in their logical minds would ever want to do that? Take such a ridiculous, such a foolhardy step. And yet I've seen it done, and I've seen BEE deals collapse because of companies thinking that's a quick way out of this triple BEE conundrum. So unless you're going to sell 100% share in your business, you sell 26%. But listen to the operative word. You sell 26% to black beneficiaries. You never give 26% away. Yes, there are 8 bonus points that are built into the scorecard were you to want to give away, rather than selling that 26% or 51% for that matter. But I always say this. Look at a company that's earned those 8 points for net value. It's called net value 8 points. If you look at a company that's earned those net value points, you immediately recommend to the CEO that they fire the consultant or the HR practitioner or whoever made that triple BEE deal. Because that is the height of laziness. It is the expression of laziness. It is a person saying, well, we don't want to comply with having to earn those 8 points back from doing everything right in terms of the 5 elements. We're prepared to sacrifice getting that money back out of the company just to earn those 8 points. There are occasions where a company gives those shares away for the right reasons, transformation, wanting to make a difference. But ordinarily, it's because they realize that they're going to lose points in other elements, that they give up asking for the value of that 26% of net value of that business, asking for that money to be paid back. So a company, if I'm doing an audit on a company that wants to increase its triple BEE value or triple BEE level, and I look at their scorecard and I see that they earned their 8 points out of the net value of those shares, that they gave the net value of those shares to the beneficiaries, I ask, who put this deal together for you? Because they've made you sacrifice getting something out of that deal. And if there's no skin in the game, the beneficiaries and recipients of those shares are not going to value those shares to the extent that if there was skin in the game and they had to work over a 10-year period to earn those shares, it makes a hell of a difference in that business. So I'm advocating, if there are CEOs on the line, look at whether or not you earned those 8 points for net value. And if you did, fire the person who put the deal together, because they shortchanged you. They were treacherous. They were disloyal to your business, unless you truly are an altruistic philanthropist. So it's critically important that you understand that 26% is non-negotiable. A minimum of 26% in ownership is going to do the job of earning you maximum points in ownership. There are different ways of doing it. Whether you're going to create a black employee trust as opposed to a black beneficiary trust. A black beneficiary trust, you still put 26% into that trust, but the beneficiaries are 1 degree further away from you than your employees would be in a black employee trust. So you've just got to decide how much of a controlling interest you want that 26% of shares to constitute. It's very unlikely that the trustees, even in a black beneficiary trust, would be in a position to get close enough to upset the way you own, run, and manage your business than the trustees in a black employee trust would, particularly because of the exposure of balance sheets, income statements, what you do with your money, how you create your dividends, how you declare your dividends, what you do with retained income, etc., etc., etc. So what kind of a trust you want to put your money, your 26% of shares into, to sell those 26% shares to, very, very important in terms of making a decision. Remember that broad-based black economic empowerment is not about ownership. It's about what's on the screen here. 26% share transfer is 26% derived economic benefit. So you can create a structure in a business that never declares a dividend. Now, the commissioner is already starting to say that's fraud. You've created a structure which is meaningless. Having created the structure, you earn the ownership points, but you're never transferring the right amount of economic benefit to that trust for the trust to actually be deriving economic benefit for the beneficiaries. So you're actually using your beneficiaries as tokens, as fronting, and you've got no intention of passing an economic benefit over to your beneficiaries. Shame on you. That's what the commission is saying. So you've got to be very careful about how you balance the notion of retained income in your business, how you balance the idea of derived benefit, and how you balance the determination of disseminated dividends, dispersed dividends in your business. The commissioner is taking a very keen interest in companies that have black beneficiary trusts. In fact, the registrar has said that we want to see that by 2023, there's no such thing as a black beneficiary trust left in BBBEE because of how it's being abused. Beneficiaries are never seeing any kind of financial or economic benefit. Dividends are never getting to them, and it's quite true. And unfortunately, those trusts are put together by accountants, they're put together by lawyers, but they're very seldom put together with the interests of your employees or real beneficiaries in mind. Another way of getting to an ownership figure, ladies and gentlemen, well, the first way of getting to that 26% ownership is by having one black individual who is instrumental in the organization to whom you transfer those 26% of shares. But a third way of ownership, of earning 26% worth of points under the ownership element. And a very creative way, I think, a good way, is by looking at the economic business units of your business and saying that there is an economic business unit. There's a part of our business, a department, or in fact a sub-business within our business, which constitutes 26% or more of the financial value of our business in terms of net asset value, but also in terms of turnover, that is a going concern in its own right within our company as a whole, which is a going concern, where what we can do is we can sell that element of our business so it becomes an asset sale. We can sell that asset to a black owner or a black consortium or even a black trust, employee trust. And in selling those assets, we give that entity that buys those assets from us for 26% of our net value of our business. We sell to that business that 26%, but we give them a contract that says we will continue using your services. We will continue using the equipment, the machinery, and assets that we've sold to you, at least for a 2, a 3, or a 5-year period. So it's a going concern. It remains a going concern. Doing that would constitute 26% black ownership. And I've had a lot of success with those kinds of deals in the business community. So you either sell shareholding or you sell a component of your business worth 26% in its entity, in its entirety. But you have a contractual and an exclusive or a non-exclusive agreement. Perfect example of this is South African breweries, I don't know, 30 years ago now, their owner-driver scheme, where they, on a Friday, they called their driver in and said to their driver, "You're fired, but come back to work on Monday. We want to talk to you about something." On Monday, the fired driver comes back to work, and South African Brewery says to him, "We want to go to Westbank with you, and at Westbank, we South African Breweries will sign surety for the truck you've been driving." And so they do that on the Monday. On the Tuesday, they say to the guy, I'm just using Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as an example of time. On the Tuesday, they say to the guy, "Now what we're going to do is we're going to give you a contract for the next 2 years to do deliveries for us. The same deliveries you were doing as a driver employee of ours, but from next week, you're going to be doing it for your own business, using a truck you now own for which we've signed surety, and we're going to give you a 2-year contract to start off with." On the Wednesday, they say to the guy, "Bring your assistant who used to work with you in, because we're going to fire them so that you can hire them as part of your business." And so by the next Friday, you've got a new business that has been created with assets that have been transferred through a surety mechanism and a 2 to 3 to 5 year contract to continue doing business with that new enterprise that's being created. Now, that's a model that was invented by South African breweries 30, 35, 40 years ago, but has become very popular since 2000 as new enterprise development and supplier development. Now, if the value that is being created in transferring that truck or those trucks to all of these drivers constitutes 26% or more of the value of the business, you do not have to engage in any other kind of activity to earn that 26% worth of element points for broad-based black economic empowerment. Ariella has sent through a question. Can you clarify the trust scheme and what is considered fronting and what not? How does one prove economic benefit if no dividends are given? Ariella, it's such a good question you're asking here. Let me answer it this way. In the first year after you've created the trust, company isn't measured by the number of dividends or the economic benefit that's been derived in the first year. But by the second year, that company has to be declaring dividends or, and this is critically important, ladies and gentlemen, there are multiple industries now, particularly those that have bargaining councils, that have determined that there will be a minimum floor of guaranteed dividend in the case where trusts have been created, they're 2 years into the operation, they're earning the company ownership points, but the beneficiaries are not deriving any dividends. So there are forced dividends. There's a floor below which companies are not allowed to drop. So companies have to guarantee when they create those trusts, in the original memorandum of incorporation for those trusts, they have to guarantee a minimum dividend, even if the company is not made profit and no dividends have been declared. And it's a couple of 100,000 rand, sometimes 200,000 or 300,000 rand, never more than that. Very seldom is it going to be more than that. There's some industries which just give a figure, and there are other industries which give a percentage of turnover done on average the last 3 years kind of thing, or the last 3 profitable years kind of thing. But generally, the registrar and the Department of Trade and Industries have got wise to the fact that there has been fronting going on. Trusts have been created. Beneficiaries have been let down and getting nothing out of it. And that's why they've put floors into multiple industries. There's no national floor yet. We think that by 2023, NEDLAC might force through a national floor to have to be created of a minimum dividend across all companies that have registered trusts, either employee beneficiary trusts or black beneficiary trusts in general. The next element is quite a tricky element because it is an element which, if you remember one of my previous slides, it is an element, I'm just going to go back to that slide there. It is an element that used to be two separate elements. It used to be management, it used to be employment equity, and then management and control. So employment equity, does the profile of my business, the profile of my employees in my business, does that reflect the national demographic of the country if I'm a national business, or of each province differently if I have footprints in each province? And that's a subject of your employment equity planning process, your workplace skills planning process, and your BBBEE planning process. And as you can see, under the old scorecard, you could earn 18 points there. And your target was 80% compliance. 80% of your employees across the band should be reflective of demographics of the country, and you could only go wrong 20% of the time. And then management control, which was an 11-point earner at that stage under the old scorecard, which was who are my management from the bottom levels all the way up through to who my board directors are in my business. Now, those two elements, employment equity on the one hand and management control, have now been combined. Originally, it was 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Originally, it was 29 points in total, management control and employment equity. It is now only 19 points. So it's been dropped by 10 points that you can earn through employment equity and management control. The skeptics against BBBEE would say, you see, they've devalued employment equity by 10 points because they've realized that the demographics in the workplace are changing. But the reality is that those 19 points are as important as those 29 points were. 29 points were under the old scorecard. So the 10-point drop has happened to accommodate other priorities, not because employment equity, there should be a sunset clause on employment equity because it's already been achieved, as some of the skeptics might wish us to believe. Management control looks at all levels within your business. And management control says that from our employment equity projections of what people of color and race, what people of race and gender and disability are at the various levels in our business is the first stage of measurement under management control. And then the next stage of measurement is who of those people of color and gender, female and disability, are at these various levels. At the lowest level being team leader and the highest level being director in the business. I say to companies all the time when I do these exercises for companies and I move them from a point of not being verified to becoming verified, look at your organogram and let your organogram be reflective. Let your managers be reflective of who you employ. Look at who is doing the work in a department. So the last time I did it was 2 weeks ago, and I looked at a company and I said to the company, you've got 10 drivers. There are 2 very senior drivers. In the morning, when you go out, you give the driving schedule to those 2 senior drivers, and they decide who amongst all 10 drivers is going to be doing what work, which means you're using them at least as team leaders, even if that's not what you call them, or as supervisors. And one of them was more senior than the other, and so therefore is virtually your first line manager. You've actually got the structure in place. And 9 times out of 10, they also happen to be the most senior in the business. So they were first into the business, which means you most probably paying them at or above what you would ordinarily pay a team leader, supervisor, or first line manager. The fact that there's something in you that's just stopped you from giving them that title, Well, that's a different argue for a different day. An argument you wouldn't want to be having in America at this moment in time, but it's a different argument for a different day. And so I spend a lot of time making companies understand there's very little PT they have to do under management control. Because when you look at who is effectively in control of that level, team leader, supervisor, first line manager level, those first three levels, it invariably is a person of color anyway, unless your business is operating in Oranje or virtually. So the bottom line is just do the PT at those three levels. You've already done the hard work. Just go the next step. The real challenge is at the senior strategic level and at the director level. That's where the real challenge comes into it, ladies and gentlemen, where there's a lot of work and attention. But the great thing about BBBEE is BBBEE says, okay, so you haven't got, black females in wheelchairs as senior strategic managers or directors. So what? Give us a plan. Give us a 3-year plan. Put trainees on a cadet program into those positions to work under the existing managers, senior managers and directors in those departments. Put them on a 3-year trajectory, like the old Woolworths or the old Edgars, may their soul rest in peace. But the old Woolworths or the old Edgars used to have that management development program where you come in over a 2 or a 3-year period, essentially straight out of varsity or sometimes even straight out of school. And then you'd be a manager in 2 or 3 years. They'd post you to a branch and suddenly you're a divisional manager, departmental manager, or a senior manager even. Put that into place in your workplace. If there's an industry association listening, create a cadet program across all of your members to make that happen. But put in a cadet program, because a cadet, in other words, a management trainee on a 3-year program that has a couple of people reporting to them already, that has some management accountability and responsibility, gets counted as a senior strategic manager or even a director or a first line manager or a supervisor or a team leader without necessarily having to be confirmed in the job already. If they're a trainee acting in that job, they're in the job as far as your verification agency is concerned. There's nothing here that is scary in terms of how your verification process works. I just want to see Craig ask the question. He asks it privately because he starts, I don't want to talk about my rash, but how can a company guarantee a dividend when they have to meet the requirements of liquidity in terms of the Company Act? Craig, you don't have to guarantee a dividend, but then you cannot use dividend recipients to earn you ownership points in terms of broad-based black economic empowerment. You have to find another way, another solution for ownership for BBBEE. And there are, by the way, lots of solutions. Okay, so this is not the only solution. But if you do create a trust, the expectation is that at least after the first year, that trust is going to start earning dividends. And if you're going to earn points in creating the trust in year 1, you better be paying out some kind of a dividend in year 2, because otherwise that's fronting, that's fraud, and you're going to go to jail, or at least people are not going to like you for a very long time to come because you've done it the wrong way. So if you're prepared to go after the points by doing this particular mechanism, then you've got to be prepared to declare dividends. Otherwise, you must find another solution towards ownership. If you're a foreign-owned business, a fourth solution is the solution that allows what we call you create a contingency. So you get an exemption from ownership if you create a contingency. A practical example of creating a contingency is what Massmart did. Massmart said, we're foreign owned, we can't give away a percentage of ownership in our business, but we're going to take what we expect to be the dividend based on the last couple of years of dividend in this business. What we expect to be the dividend, we're going to times it by 5 for 5 years, and we're going to put that into a bank account, and it's $1 billion. We anticipate that 26% of ownership in our business is going to be the equivalent of R1 billion or $1 billion. We're going to put that into a bank account now, and we're going to use it for a black beneficiary empowerment. So we're going to create a bursary fund or a building fund or a sewage fund or whatever we're going to create. And so that exemption process It does happen. The Department of Trade and Industry do exempt companies that are foreign owned sometimes from having to comply in that regard. So there are many ways of doing it. But Craig, if you're creating a dividend assessed vehicle, then issue a dividend. Because if you do not, and you go multiple year after multiple year after multiple year, eventually the trust is going to get collapsed, but you're going to get fined. If you see that you're getting into a downward spiral and it's going to take 5 years before you declare a dividend again, then collapse the trust, sacrifice your BBBEE points, find them somewhere else, or come up with another ownership solution. But don't be disingenuous. Don't ask this question, in terms of liquidity, in terms of the Companies Act. First of all, you know that can be engineered. So when one talks about retained earnings, et cetera, all of that is something which is completely within your control. But if you're going to go after these particular points, implement this particular solution. Let's not be disingenuous, sir. What has most probably changed the most dramatically over the last 2 years is the next element, which is the third element, is the skills development element. The skills development element was changed by 2017. Whereas originally it was measured by a 6% expenditure against payroll, a flat 6% expenditure against payroll before 2017. What was realized is that when along came fees must fall, where government said we're going to give free education and then realized it didn't have enough money to give free education, it passed the burden for free education onto industries and companies and said, we're not going to give free education. We want you guys to give free education. So we're going to take the 6% in the skills development budget, which would earn you your skills development points from the scorecard. And we're going to further now create a scenario that looks something like this. And if you look at the yellow component of what's now on the screen, we're going to take that 6% skills development budget and we're going to divide it into 2.1.1.1 and 2.1.1.2. But essentially what that means is this, that there are 7 areas for expenditure on skills. Okay, there are 7 areas for expenditure on skills. And in fact, what we're going to say is that under 2.1.1.1, 3.5% of payroll gets spent on those 7 areas. In fact, gets spent on 6 areas of the original 7 areas. And 2.1.1.2 says 2.5% of payroll now gets spent on one area, which is higher education bursaries. So suddenly, very cleverly, one could say almost deceitfully, government has created a situation where it's promised free higher education out there, but it's transferred the burden, primary burden. It'll still pay something, but the primary burden of paying for those higher education bursaries, it's now transferred over to the workplace, where it's said to the workplace, 2.5% of your payroll must be spent on higher education bursaries. It doesn't have to be for people in your company, though. So take 2.5% of your payroll, give it to a university, let them be able to give out free bursaries, and we, the government, will have satisfied fees must fall, and at the same time, made the quality of the training relevant to where the need is. Ordinarily, we would not expect a company to be spending that 2.5% of payroll on a higher education bursary unless it related to what their company need was. And this is where the HR practitioner becomes important to your company, because if you are going to do that, give higher education money to a university, and the HR practitioner has done their job, they will determine which areas of study will allow you to create labor pools into the future. So that if you create a bursary and you give money to Wits University on condition that you can be involved in recruiting that person out of school into that program to begin with, on condition that that person undertakes that every single holiday they will work for free in your business, proving themselves, but also showing the employer what it is that they're funding through that bursary mechanism. And then saying to the individual, once you've got your qualification, we're going to offer you a job because you're on a fast track to working in our business because you were on a bursary from our business. So the 6% has been that original 6% requirement under the 2013 scorecard, 6% of payroll has now been divided up into 3.5% of payroll on 6 of the 7 priority areas and 2.5% of payroll on the priority area relating to higher education training bursaries. Now I'm going to sound a little bit like Verimark, but that's not all, folks, because the reality is what was 6% has now been increased. It's been increased by adding a 2.1.1.3 requirement or criteria under skills development, and it's a 0.3% of expenditure on disability. 0.3% of payroll must be spent on disability, on training of people with disability in your workplace and for your workplace. So now suddenly we've got skills development 6% of payroll increasing to 6.3% of payroll. So when someone says, what's your skills levy? And you say, I think it's 1%. No, it's not. Your skills levy is not 1%. It is 6.3% of payroll. 1% of which gets paid to a SETA, and the other 5.3% gets spread amongst 2.1.1, 0.2, 0.3 in your business if you want to earn the maximum skills development points that are allocated for skills for the skills development element, which is element number 3. It's a very nice solution. It's a very smooth solution. It's a solution that takes to learnerships, internships, disability. It's a very elegant solution. The way that the skills development element has changed and has morphed from 6% of payroll to 6.3% of payroll, but now taking care of your internal staff, taking care of labor pools you're going to need coming into your business, taking care of higher education and training as it might relate to your business, and taking care of disability training in your workplace. That is not a moving of the goalposts. That is a refinement of a very blunt instrument called 6% of payroll before those changes came in. Ariella says the 2.5% has to be spent with registered higher education training. Yes. So the three, good question, Ariella. Thanks for that question. The 2.5% can only be spent on a Council of Higher Education accredited programs, either private universities or public universities or private training providers or further education training providers that are accredited for higher education training programs as well. But accreditation is a non-negotiable for that 2.5%. However, and this becomes very, very sexy if you're a business association or a professional body, or if you're a training provider that's just been too lazy or unable to become accredited by a South African Qualifications Authority licensed quality assurance body. 25% of that 3.5% of payroll, 2.1.1.1.1.1.1, whatever it is, 25% of that amount there can be spent on non-accredited stuff. For example, an internal training activity that's not accredited, product training, application training, supplier training on product that is supplied into a business, developing internal training material that can then be given to staff either online or face-to-face. 25% of that 3.5% can be spent on non-accredited training purposes. It can be spent by continuous professional development programs being offered by business associations, the money that you have to spend on non-accredited training for trade union shop stewards that you have to fork out. All of that stuff, 25% of that 3.5% of payroll budget can be for non-accredited stuff. But in answer to your question, Ariella, certainly 2.1.1.2 has to be spent on accredited higher education training programs, whole qualifications. The South African National Accreditation Service, SANAS, which accredits verification agencies, has indicated to verification agencies that it might be willing to allow them to accept that 2.5% is also spent on skills programs of bigger qualifications which are accredited. But we haven't yet got a directive in that regard. I hope that answers your question, Ariella. Any other questions before I carry on? Guys, skills development is a very, very important area of your entire focus. Any other questions? Anyone want to ask a question? It's very lonely from where I'm sitting. Okay. No questions are forthcoming. Ariella says, most definitely, thank you so much. Okay, good. All right, moving on. Now we get to what I think is massively overtraded here in South Africa. Again, it's a very, very sexy area of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And it's this area here called procurement. Procurement is an area where, in fact, you've got 40-odd points to earn. Of those 40-odd points, you're going to earn 15 points between new enterprise development and supplier development. And the rest of those points are going to be earned in procurement straight. But basically, the science of this particular element, and I just want to quickly go back to this slide, but the science of this particular element here, the science of this particular element here is in this. It is in those 45 points that you're going to earn 5 points for, it's the other way around now, by the way. You're going to earn 5 points for enterprise supplier development, and you're going to earn 10 points you're going to earn 5 points for new enterprise development and 10 points for supplier development. So those 15 points under the old scorecard have been subsumed under these 45 points here under element 4. And what you have to understand is the difference between enterprise development and supplier development. Essentially, what the game says is this, that we have created a scenario that we are trying to get more and more Black businesses into the supply chain of your business. And for that, to understand what I've just said, we want to go back to this slide. We want to get more and more Indian-owned, colored-owned, Black-owned businesses, preferably Black female-owned businesses, but we want to get more and more of these kinds of businesses into the supply chain of your business. And we realize that they might not exist. And because they don't exist, what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to encourage you. We're going to have to encourage you here by offering you 5 points out of 45 points to create them, to create those new businesses in year 1, and then 10 points in year 2 for you to take that new business that you've created in year 1 and in year 2 for you to give them a long-term contract to supply into your business. Now, this is where it becomes quite tricky. And you really do need to understand this, ladies and gentlemen, because the registrar is starting to identify those companies that take 1% of net profit after tax, which is the amount you're supposed to spend on building a new business, that takes that 1% of net profit after tax and simply throws it at some professional new enterprise building consultant who runs around and says, well, we build businesses. So give us that 1% of net profit after tax. We'll build a business and we'll give you a certificate that will give you those 5 points. The registrar has started to say that's fraud, because what's happening is the guy who's taking your 1% of net profit after tax is going to Umhlanga Beach. He's collecting some of the ice cream sellers. He's giving them a T-shirt. He might even give them a free ice box for their ice creams. And suddenly he's calling them a new business. At the end of the year, he might come back and say, there's a piece of paper, please sign it so we can register you as a business. You're an ice cream seller on Umhlanga Beach. Now you're a business owner. So we've created a new business, a new enterprise, and we've earned the company giving the 1% of net profit after tax. We've earned them their 5 points, but we've taken that 1% of net profit after tax. I had a discussion with one of those consultants, very smooth, slick consultants, who said, we charge companies 150,000 Rand per beneficiary, and we give them those 5 points. So they give us 150,000 Rand, we give them those 5 points, and we massage that 150,000 Rand into their net profit after tax, showing that it's 1% or more. But for every 150,000 Rand they give us, we give them a certain number of points. The registrar said, but that's fraud. That ice cream seller's got nothing to do with the cleaning business that's giving that 1% of net profit after tax to that new enterprise consultant. That is pure fraud. We're going to do a retroactive audit. We're going to see if those new enterprises have been converted to suppliers. And if they haven't been converted to suppliers, we're going to lay criminal charges against that company. And it's only right that they do that. Because quite frankly, the whole purpose of the enterprise and supplier development objective is to create new black businesses in the supply chain of the businesses which are benefiting with BBBEE points. Any questions? Anyone want to take issue with what I've said? Because I know it's relatively problematic. It sounds relatively explosive what I've just said, particularly by my calling it fraud, because there's some very well-respected people in our community whose entire businesses are predicated on collecting that 1% and then the 2% for supplier development as well, believe it or not, from companies, and giving the companies a certificate that says that they earn the 15 points without having to actually improve their own supply chain. Any questions, any concerns? Anybody wants to express anything in that regard? Because I realize it's very, very explosive what I've just said, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, no comments. Very quiet audience out there. Fair enough. I fully understand where you're coming from. Okay, so the majority of the points, so 30 of those 45 points, 30 of those 45 points there are not from enterprise or supplier development, but 30 of those 45 points are coming from procurement. And the science behind procurement is this, that what we are trying to do is encourage businesses to deal with and to buy from at least level 4 businesses that give them 100% of procurement credit so that they can earn those points under those 30 points under this fourth element here, which is procurement. So the idea then is to encourage your procurement department to try and even out the spreadsheet of who your suppliers are, to show that in terms of procurement spend, 80% of procurement that you're actually expending every year in your business is spent on an average of level 4 businesses, which essentially means a level 4 business means that if I'm going to give to my mother-in-law that's maybe only earning me 10%, so I'm losing 90%, I have to gain that 90% elsewhere from enough level 1, 2, and 3 businesses to bring me back to an average of 100% level 4 amongst my suppliers out there in the supplier database. Does that make sense? I know it sounds very technical. It's actually very simple. Draw up a spreadsheet and say, have I spoken to my level non-compliant 8, 7, 6, and 5 level suppliers, and have I given them a time frame within which I expect them all to become an average of level 4, or told them that at least I'm going to tether and start reducing the amount of business I give them, and at worst, I'm going to stop doing business with them. Because the reality is that in this day and age, for every good level 5, 6, or 7, 8, or non-compliant business out there, there are level 1, 2, 3, and 4 businesses that do exist that you could equally be buying stock and services and supply from. So it is a very, very important consideration that you understand that in terms of this procurement budget, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the majority of your points is going to come from. Your enterprise, supplier development, and procurement activities in your business. No questions about that? Right, so we'll move on now. Your fifth element is an element which is a socio-economic development element. And essentially, this is where government expects you to be the lottery. Government literally expects the company to be the lottery. And for you to start giving to the NGO sector and to all of those chocks out there and all of those feeding schemes and out there and all of those early childhood development schools out there that ordinarily would get money from social services, from the Department of Higher Education or the Department of Education and Training, or in fact from other government departments. This is where government has said, let's force businesses to have to fund the NGO sector so that we as government can reduce the dependency on us to do likewise. And so you've become the lottery just by needing broad-based Black economic empowerment for your business. And so you need to understand what qualifies as a socio-economic development opportunity. I say to my client companies, by the way, I say to them all of the time, you do not give 1% of net profit after tax as your socio-economic investment unless you're giving it for the benefit of your workforce. So in a practical way, if you've given money to CHOC, children with cancer, and you want to continue giving money to CHOC, children with cancer, do so. But do so because you've got an agreement with CHOC that says that, God forbid, any employee in the business suddenly has need of CHOC. Because the company has given money to CHOC, the employees will be at the front of the queue every time. So that you can at least say to your staff, we've bought you a benefit from a CHOC, or we've bought you a benefit from this NGO or that NGO, that NPO. We've bought your kids a benefit in terms of their schooling or even their university education through the socio-economic development program we've put into place. But never simply give the money away. Never trust a consultant who says, give me that 1% of net profit after tax. I'll invest it in a scheme and I'll give you your 5 points back. Kate, I remember, and I see Kate is online, I remember you and I having this discussion in a previous lifetime, but you understand exactly what I'm saying. That the consultant that comes along and says to you, Kate, give me that money, I'll give you the 5-point certificate back, but really there's no benefit for you or for your staff members at all. For me, I understand what the registrar is saying when the registrar says, that's not good. That's not what we ever ask companies to do, but it's what companies are doing. The majority of what's gone wrong with BBBEE, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, and then I'll go on to the second stage of this discussion, but the majority of what's gone wrong has gone wrong because of an ill-informed human resource practitioner or a lazy human resource practitioner or a lazy BBBEE consultant or a consultant that's getting kickbacks in one way or another from suppliers and providers out there in the marketplace. There is nothing wrong with any one of these elements. They are sound elements. If something goes wrong, it is invariably because it's the BE consultant or the HR consultant or the bookkeeper or the accountant that has made, and very often the lawyer, who has made it go wrong. Too many intervening interests. Instead of the CEO saying, I'm responsible, my board is responsible, and if we play this thing properly, we can get huge benefit. I want to give you an example of what huge benefit means. And for this, I want to quickly go back to this ownership issue. I want to give you an example of what huge benefit means. Because if you look at that original ownership slide, 26% of net value of your business. Do you know that if you take the value of that 26% and you transfer that to a trust, you sell that 26% of shares, those 26% of shares to a trust, you can earn yourself 225% of the value of those shares over a 10-year period. That's not giving away those 26% shares. But it's only a CEO who has an interest in finding that out and asking the right questions that will discover that. And do you know, more importantly, that the CEO would be in a position to, number one, take the full value of the equity in the business and pay it out over a 15-year period to himself before he even starts to transfer shares to a trust. If he's managing the thing himself rather than relegating it to an HR practitioner or someone who doesn't have the best interests of the board of directors and the shareholders in the company at heart. It is only in a company with lazy practitioners that things go wrong. It's only in a company with get-rich-quick lawyers and consultants and bookkeepers and accountants and equity consultants out there that things go wrong. And I must say, I, for one, am very tired of people blaming BBBEE and saying BBBEE is a corrupt scheme. It is a beautiful scheme. It is in the operationalization of it that things go wrong. But that's got nothing to do with BBBEE. It's got to do with those consultants and those accountants and those lawyers out there. Someone said to me, a consultant is worse than a second-hand car salesman. And she was actually talking about me. She was talking to me and about myself. She was saying to me, you're worse than a second-hand car salesman. And I looked at her and I said, you're completely correct. I'm not enamored. I'm not impressed with consultants out there. And I call myself a consultant. But I like to think I'm not in the same boat as those other consultants, because there are many fraudulent consultants out there and they give the rest of us a bad name as far as I'm concerned. Listen to me on my moral high ground about to be knocked down. But nevertheless, I hope you understand what I'm saying. Okay. I want to now go to the second part. And I think I'm going to have to run an in-depth workshop on the second part. Not I think, I know. And I'm more than happy to do it as a follow-up. But the second part is this. Let me just quickly skip back to that slide. Second part is this. If you have struggled using this new scorecard, you've struggled, you've got a good consultant, and you eventually get to a level 4. And you're proud of yourself because you were a level 5 or 6 or 7, but you've got to a level 4. But you're finding that it's too expensive or too difficult or just not practically possible given the constraints of your business to move from a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1. There's the most amazing system that was released 2 years ago into the marketplace that most businesses just don't believe. They don't seem to know about and they don't seem to want to believe in. And that's the youth employment system. Because what the president did when he was deputy president, when he brought in, yes, the youth employment system, he said this. He said, we need to get more people who are getting qualified but are unemployed. We need to get them into employment. If you as a company are prepared to give me 1 year of exposure at entry level or any level in your business where you can use that person effectively, not as a training program now, but in the workplace, doing a proper job, standing alongside other people doing the proper job, earning whatever they earn as a minimum wage at that level, doesn't matter. But you give them a proper job, then I will make you this deal. I, the government, will work out based on your employees, based on your average net profit, based on your turnover. I will work out a yes target for you, which is the number of people above your current head count that for a year you're going to have to grow by just for that year. So it's a fixed term contract with no expectation of gainful employment at the end of it. I will then work out a target for you, which if you meet that target, and then I'm going to ask you to employ 2% of that target that you've met in the course of the year. If you just do that for me, you bring your target number as a headcount increase for that year on board of people who qualified. So you're not going to have to train or teach them. They must already have the qualifications you want. But you bring them on board for that year, fixed term contract for 12 months. And at the end of it, you just employ 2% of them, which out of 20 people is 1 person. If you do that for me, I will allow you to skip 1 BBBEE level. So if you do that for me, you can move from a 4 to a 3. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to even change the rules later on. And that's what he did. And I'm going to say, I'll allow you to move from a 4 to a 3 when you sign the contract, not when you complete the contract. I'll do it on blind faith. I trust the fact that you won't let me down. But here's the clincher. So you'll move from a 4 to a 3. But you know what? If you're prepared to take a gamble and double your target, so let's say your target is 5 people. I expect you to increase your headcount by 5. But if you're prepared to take a gamble and increase it by 10 people instead, double your target, and then employ 5%, not 2% now, but 5% of those people who've been on this YES program at the end of that year, I will allow you to move from a 4 to a 2. And again, in the first year of it, I don't expect you to wait until the end of the 12-month period. At the moment you sign the contract, I'll allow that to happen, that you can move from a 4 to a 2. Now, how's that for something positive? There are roughly about 40,000 people, just under 40,000 people. There are roughly about 40,000 people on these contracts in this country at this moment in time. 40,000 people who companies have given a 12-month contract to, irrespective of how they're being used in the company. And there are obviously lots of niceties and fine issues that can be tweaked along the way if you implement a YES program. But essentially, the highlight of it is, if you double your target, you can skip 2 levels. And if you just meet your target, I will allow you to skip 1 level. And it's the simplest thing in the world to do. Because trust me, maybe not so much now during COVID, maybe not so much during the 6-month recovery period after COVID, but certainly we'll get back to that point where you can always do with better qualified, more eager, more hungry people to come into your workplace on a fixed term contract where you can pay their minimum wage for that year and get blood out of them, quite frankly. Because the government knows, okay, we'll give you that 12-month opportunity with that guy. Because we know at the end of the 12 months, you're going to become so dependent on that guy, you're going to want to offer him a full-time job. And that's when the trade unions have a problem, because the trade unions know that invariably you're going to want to labor replace. You're going to want to bring that guy in and get rid of someone who's been in the job for 20 years but not making the same quality of contribution. So that's YES, the youth employment system. And I'm going to want to run a specific webinar on YES because there's some beautiful intricacies of YES that should become very palatable for you in the process, ladies and gentlemen. So we've gone a little bit over the time we allocated for this webinar. Can I ask you, are there any questions or concerns or anything you would like to chat to me about in this regard? Anyone want to make any comment or ask any question? Okay. Well, it's been a rollicking ride, and thank you all for participating. And yes, I will send the link to this recording to you all, to this YouTube video to you all. But thank you very much for joining me, and I hope if you're still on lockdown, at least it's given you something to do instead of sleep in the afternoon. And if you're back in the workplace, the one thing I do want to say to you is every company I've spoken to is almost inclined now to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, we've got too many priorities to think about BBBEE. Now's the time to think about BBBEE, my friends. Because as you saw from the incentives that were made available and the aid and relief that was made available for small businesses, and the aid and relief that was made available for the tourism and hospitality sector, government now has formulated a strategy that has been rubber stamped by the Constitutional Court that says that from now on, all supply side incentives given out by the Department of Trade and Industry, by the Small Business Department, by even Social Security, is going to become race-based from now on, because the Constitutional Court has said, that's fine, guys. You can deploy an absolutely racist stance in how you give out supply side grants, aid, and benefit in South Africa, and we'll rubber stamp that for you as the Constitutional Court. So if you think BBBEE is becoming less important, my friends, it's become more important over the last 2 months than ever before. That's the problem we've now got. And if you're not wise to it, if you don't have a strategy to embrace it and implement it, you're going to fall by the wayside. And I've seen it happen too often, too quickly, to think that I'm just fibbing. But thank you all very, very much for participating. It's great to see that the people that started are the people that ending, even though we're an hour and a half into it. Thanks very much, guys. I appreciate your time and attention.